Hi everybody, you're watching Apex Insider, the interview series bringing you insight and opinion from thought leaders in the airline passenger experience industry. This week we're going to be diving right into the wonderful world of aircraft cabin design with the director of an award-winning creative design agency based right here in West London. Apex Insider is made possible by the support of Global Eagle. Connect, entertain, empower with innovation from Global Eagle. Simpson, director of Apex Media, and some of you may have an inkling who our special guest is today, but for those of you who do not, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Adam White.
Hi, Marianne.
Adam is a director at Factorydesign, an agency with a great reputation for design innovation in the airline space and quite a few sort of cabin transformation and airline branding projects under your belt. Welcome, Adam. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for asking me, Marianne.
Yeah, so Adam, why don't you kind of start us off by telling us a little bit about what your career has been like so far and what happens at Factorydesign?
Well, thank you. Big question because it's quite long, but I started off as a product designer, having done a degree in the 80s and worked at a business called Pentagram Design, which was unique at the time because it was multidisciplinary. So as well as product design, I watched things like interior design going on, and it was a fascinating process. And I went from there to a business called Seymour Powell, which was, again, a product design business in essence, but they liked to challenge what they did, and they had got into things like motorcycle design, which was fascinating. And having got to the position of an associate partner there, I and a colleague, Adrian Berry, who also had become an associate partner at Seymour Powell, we thought it was time to go on our own, and that was 21 years ago. So we set up Factorydesign. We were quite quickly joined by a chap called Peter Tennant, who came in as our managing director to kind of round us up and point us in the right direction. And that was the start of Factorydesign.
Okay, and can you talk about some of the aviation-related projects that you guys have worked on over the years?
Yeah, there have been a few. The first big, proper program that we did, I think a year after we'd started the company, was British Airways Concorde. and it was the most extraordinary job. We were extremely lucky, and we got the job because we'd been pitching to do what was, I think, their second lie-flat seat. But the pitching process, they had seen a dozen different businesses, and we had, I think, scored at the bottom in terms of business because there were probably 4 of us at the time, but luckily for us at the top of people they wanted to work with. So the lie-flat seat program was too big, but somehow we persuaded them we could, work for them. A month later, we had a call to say, you better sit down. We'd like you to work on Concorde.
Wow, that's a bit of good fortune, isn't it?
It was an extraordinary job, and it was a very wide brief because they wanted it to be a big and complete refresh of the cabin that had been flying 25 years. And in that time, it had had some refreshment, new seats, etc. But it still, to board at that time in the late 90s, it still felt kind of old-fashioned somehow, very aircrafty. And yet outside it was still the most beautiful aircraft flying. So our job from the beginning was to try to bring the outside in.
Okay, and then more recently, some projects with some other airlines?
Yeah, I get, having done Concorde, we thought, well, that's it. We've been going a year, 2 years, whatever. There'll never be another huge, exciting program. And then, a decade ago, we won the job to do the Etihad A380. And that developed into the 787 and other products for Etihad. And it was a huge job. And they were the most extraordinary client because they had a very straightforward vision. They didn't want to be the biggest, they wanted to be the best. And for a design business, you can't get a better brief.
Awesome. Okay, so we ran into each other at the Aircraft Interiors Expo in Hamburg. And I was just sort of wondering if you saw anything at the event that really caught your eye or sort of made you say,
Do you know, I think as a designer, sadly, at Hamburg these days, you tend not to get invited into the back room on most of the stands, and of course that's where all the sort of exciting innovation apparently lies. What was really noticeable this year was that the big airframe makers, the big galley or lav makers, they were offering products that only a couple of years ago, if you had gone with your airline as a designer to say, we want it to be like this, there would have been a lot of sucking through the teeth and, you know, we just don't work this way. But now, as standard products, some of the big manufacturers are offering things that were just impossible a few years ago. And whether or not an airline will take those standard products or want to customize to make something suit them is kind of academic. I think most significant for me, and I'm sure any other designer, was there is proof now at just what can be done.
All right, here's a bit of a general question. What makes a cabin beautiful? I think from an overall aesthetic, when a passenger walks on board and says, wow, I'm so excited.
When you first walk in.
Yeah. What is it?
I think, you know, it's like when you're buying a new home. It's supposed to happen in that first few seconds. When you walk into a cabin, the first thing you get is the light, the level, the colour. Then there's the colour of the cabin itself. And then there's the architecture of the cabin, because both the colour of the cabin and the architecture will reflect that light. So there's that first breath of the plane and how it feels, you know, whether it's familiar or new or kind of zesty or whatever it is. It's that first moment that you walk in, there's that strong impression.
From a personal point of view, what's your favorite color sort of palette, I guess, to work with in the cabin? And maybe is there one that you would shy away from or that you are reluctant to work with? Maybe?
My favorite color palette would be white everywhere. Okay. And it's the least likely color palette of all because it's not apparently very practical.
No, I think operationally it's a bit of a nightmare.
It is a nightmare, but you know, you have to look at an aircraft cabin in terms of a passenger experience as where would they, you know, what would they really get excited about on the ground. And if you picture some of the most fabulous interior designs you see on the ground, they're often, you know, ethereal and light and therefore white. So somehow, nanotechnology perhaps.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more. I do like a light and airy cabin. I think Finnair has done a good job with that. With
Terrific.
Their,
yeah. Be interesting to see what maintenance said about that when it was unveiled.
Yeah. Okay, is there one thing, and this is a bit of a cheeky question, but if you could just sort of say to all the airlines out there right now, one thing from a design perspective that they need to just stop doing, what would that be?
I think it's, yeah, I mean, that depends how I interpret that question, but my interpretation will be right at the very start of the process, the seat is always the hero. Mm-hmm. And of course, the seat is hugely important. You're going to spend however many hours sitting in it. But the seat was the first point that the industrial designer, the product designer like me, was able to make an intervention on an aircraft. And that's kind of stuck as the focus. I think as we saw at Hamburg only a few months ago, the doors are opening on the rest of the cabin. And I think there's a huge opportunity to bring everything together and no longer see all those elements as, you know, that's the seat department, that's guys who deal with galleys, those are the lavs. What we want is to try and bring it together into this amazing sort of homogeneous experience.
Okay, interesting. We were talking a little bit about IP, intellectual property, and we discussed that there are some, I guess, concerning trends or...
Yeah, you know, IP is a tricky one. One of the main things that the design industry has brought to the airline industry has been new ideas, and that of course is IP. That's the currency, if you like, of what we produce. And there's a limit to how many new ways, for instance, you can package somebody lying down in a cabin. Fortunately for us, there are different levels of things that designers are able to bring to a cabin to make it unique and belong to an airline. But intellectual property is something that historically it has been manufacture that protects best than designers. There are design businesses that are pretty good at organising patents, but largely the nature of the program means that you assign intellectual property for everything you do to the client airline, and then of course the airline would have to protect the IPR.
Is there a way that, as an industry, we can rectify this problem, or is it just the cost of doing business as a design agency?
I think it is the cost that has been spent. We can't reinvent or rewrite the rules for how intellectual property is managed, I guess, for the business. But I'd like to think that going forward into the future, it becomes I guess, a more equitable relationship between the client, the manufacturer, and the designer. And I guess that's about as far as we can go with that.
All right, here's a bit of a blue sky question for you now. If you're still doing this job in 2030, 2040, 2050, for example, what kind of things would you like to be designing for airlines in the future?
I guess, my hope for the future is that it brings with it not necessarily a change to how we try to look after people in aircraft, but the way that we're able to do it. Because at the moment, virtually all cabin equipment is made in a similar way, and moreover a way it's been made for a long time. And I'd like to think with new materials we can get away from the sort of slab tombstone construction of everything and start to make things that are sort of lighter and have an ethereal delicateness about them, because I do feel at the moment that it is only on aircraft that seats seem to take so much materials and weight as much as anything.
Is there any materials that you've seen maybe from the sort of materials and components part of the industry that you think is really exciting?
I think the sort of hardy perennials of titanium on the one hand and carbon fibre on the other. But with those materials, it's about the way they're processed. And I think that with additive manufacture and some of the developments in moulding, I think for sure that will liberate us to be able to use them.
And I'm sure those guys are working very hard to sort of give you what you want as well.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Adam. That's all the time that we've got for today, unfortunately. Where can our viewers go to find out a little bit more about factory design?
I guess the easiest place is to visit our website, and that's factorydesign.co.uk.
All right, and for all our viewers out there, don't forget to subscribe to the Apex YouTube channel and visit www.apex.aero to learn more about the Airline Passenger Experience Association. Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time.